So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario with an all-new map, this one also made by the Flame of Arnor, so continuing where he left off with a few that we have seen recently as well. I believe this is intended to be Ostin Athiel, although based on the factions that are actually defending this little settlement here, and based on its close proximity to the sea, I would be more tempted to give this settlement a name that is somewhere from Lindon, or well, Lindon or Harlindon, somewhere on the far western coast perhaps, rather than anything else. This is also a little bit peculiar because this is a very, very quick battle by the looks of things at only 13k frames, and yet there's quite a few players on the field, quite a few armies as well, so I'm a little bit confused as to how this battle is actually going to shake up. But anyways, while it may be a very quick battle indeed, it is still a fully custom scenario with an all-new settlement, so it's definitely the sort of thing that I wanted to cover. I'm curious to see how this is going to go, really. It's going to be interesting to say the least, but we can see that the Elves of Lindon are on the defence here, fighting on what I would assume to be home turf. Again, if it is Ostin Athiel, it's not quite so cut and dry, but we'll see. But we'll go through the attacking armies first and foremost, a host of orcs, and we are going to be viewing this battle from the perspective of Ankles here, and he's going to be playing as Mordor, as you would expect, so an orcish faction, very much on the attack once more. Some orc maulers, which, to be fair, against Lindon are not going to be so effective, although there are some elven reinforcements on the way against which armour piercing will be more effective, which is a good thing, because of course their fragility will also be pretty bad in all respects against Lindon. Both in melee and if they come under fire from any of Lindon's archers as well. Having said that, I mean, to be fair, most Elven factions are going to be pretty good at dealing with low-end shock infantry like this. They simply don't have the staying power to be as useful as they could be against, in particular, the Western Kingdoms of Men. Uruk captains are in here as well. Their little bonus that they have in comparison to other similar types of multiple HP sword and board bodyguard units tends to be their armour piercing. Once again, not all that useful against Lindon, though they are still a reasonably solid unit in their own right defensively, so that is something which they do have in their favour. Just in behind, a far more useful unit to use against a faction like Lindon are going to be the Minas Morgul's Chosen. We very often see this unit employed by Mordor, in all fairness, as a bit of a bulwark on the front line to withstand a lot of damage, and that's exactly what they're going to need to do, particularly at range. In melee they're still going to struggle a little bit, they won't be able to keep pace damage wise with the kind of units that Lindon will be throwing at them, but they're still a very vital part of Mordor's centre. More orc maulers, as we've already seen. Orc javelins could be a very useful facet of Mordor's attack, however, here, considering the fact that doing good damage to those defenders in a more efficient fashion is going to be very, very important, I think, and Lindon are not going to want to utilise their ammunition too much on a unit like this. They always represent a bit of a conundrum for defenders to have to try and deal with, given the fact that they cost so little, and yet they can do a lot of damage if you let them be. You don't necessarily want to use important ammunition on them either. Speaking of important ammunition, we have the steel bows employed by the Temple Guard here. Lindon do have a few very heavily armoured high-tier units in small numbers, and that's exactly the sort of unit that the Temple Guard will be looking to assassinate with their very dangerous projectiles. They're also pretty good in melee. They won't be able to match the very best Lindon unit in melee, but everything else they will be able to, at the very least, stand up to, but in many cases outright defeat 1v1, so it's the sort of quality that Mordor can sprinkle into their force that will be important here against the kind of foes they're up against. We have some Morannon infantry. The rank and file of Mordor are going to be important here as well, because Mordor, as much as they do have those high quality units that we just mentioned, numbers are going to be the way that they ultimately will be able to deal with Lindon. And in behind them we also have some Morannon halberds. A phalanx like this is going to be important. Lindon's pikes are going to be the sort of thing which can do a number on them, and of course the Elven reinforcements is something we haven't really been touching upon, but generally speaking the Elves, in terms of phalanxes, Lindon have got the most plentiful units, but factions like Lothlorien and Imladris of course have got very high tier offerings. But the Morannon halberds are pretty much a must bring in most siege situations, certainly for Mordor, purely because it's the only phalanx anchor that Mordor have in their roster available to them. Even if the armour piercing isn't all that useful, the formation that they come with most certainly is. We have some Sauron's Will. Once again, armour piercing, though their higher tier nature does make them a little bit more understandable to bring in comparison to the orc maulers that we've already spoken about, but their armour piercing reliance is still going to hurt them, at least in the very first phase of this fight, though based on how short this fight is, they may have the opportunity to go after something a little bit more fruitful for them. We have some Moran on guard just in behind as well, so not as good as the Moran on infantry, certainly not in a siege situation like this. If there are cavalry units to be had, then they can make a decent defence against them, but other than that, pretty unremarkable. More Moran on guard, more Minas Morgul chosen, plenty more Moran on infantry. If the elves are going to counter-attack and be aggressive, then this sort of unit can be very useful. Archers of any description can be pretty efficient against Lindon. Even lowly orc archers like this can be surprisingly effective. It's one of the main reasons why Lindon are so difficult to play in this current version of the game. Their survivability really does let them down in spite of their high cost and low numbers, so it can be a really difficult thing to reconcile with. Recently, of course, we did see them in action in the new patch where they look to be a little bit more effective, though that is a small sample size of one battle, so we'll have to wait and see if that holds true. Sauron's Will, more orc maulers, and at the very centre of this army we have excuse me, something's stuck there, but yeah, Temple Executioners, the one unit really of Mordor's that can go toe to toe with anything Lindon has to offer. They will still lose, especially without their armour upgrade, against something like the Noldorin Blade Masters. Nazgul can stand up to them as well, but in small numbers, of course. We have the Warlord playing as Mordor also. Moran on archers are going to be up to a little bit more in that range than the orc archers. They're a little bit more resilient as well, though, in terms of taking damage. None of the attacking forces are really going to be able to do the business against Lindon and any of the elves. More Moran on archers, more Moran on infantry. We have the Olag High as well. Elven factions are better placed than most, I find, to deal with trolls, because all of them have got access to some really good heavy swordsmen in their mid to upper tier line, and even their standard line infantry tends to be able to deal enough damage to the point where trolls can't simply hang around and do horrific amounts of damage like they can to many other factions who rely on maybe a little bit more efficiency, and that can be their undoing against a force that is able to do damage to them this quickly. We mentioned the Nazgul briefly. If they can remain in and amongst all of the Warlord's regular units, then they can be a very, very useful asset to have. But we'll see. We have some around on halberds, already mentioned the benefits of bringing them. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr, an interesting one. They'll be able to withstand a lot of punishment at range, and Lindon are very lightweight, so if they can get in and amongst Lindon before the reinforcements arrive, could be absolutely vital to ensuring some sort of attacker momentum going into the latter stages of this fight, although we're already pretty much within the final 10,000 frames of this one, so I don't really know how to quantify the latter stages, so to speak. Uruk captains are here. We've got some more Moran on infantry, more Moran on halberds, more Moran on infantry, more Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Moran on infantry, and behind Minas Morgul's chosen, more Minas Morgul's chosen, Sauron's Will, so yeah, pretty much what you would expect. Over on the other side we have more Mordor forces. Hidden Zed, it's got some Olag High, we already mentioned how they could be effective, timing everything when you're using a unit of trolls. We have Uruk captains, again, all of this armour piercing is not going to be so useful early on, but perhaps overwhelming force can be applied quickly, we'll have to wait and see. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, the mass pushing capabilities against lightweight elves, as we've already mentioned, very, very useful potentially. Moran on guard, orc maulers, more Sauron's Will. It's a lot of Sauron's Will to be bringing from Hidden Zed. I mean, it is a custom scenario, so armies are of course assigned, but not going to be the most useful thing in the world, I don't think. Moran on halberds, a couple of units of them, orc archers, and Moran on halberds once more. And then over here we have the final Mordor attacking army under the command of Josh. We've got some more Olag High, we've got some Temple Executioners once again, Moran on infantry, orc maulers, Sauron's Will, Moran on halberds. We've still got more orc archers in there as well, so ranged options, but maybe not as many as there would be archers wise for Mordor if they were able to bring their own force. Orc maulers, Minas Morgul chosen, so they do have a decent solid core. Orc javelins are in there as well, Moran on halberds, and yeah, orc maulers and more Moran on guard, so numbers are certainly something that Mordor aren't going to be wanting for here. And I imagine based on the length of the fight, it's going to be very, very quick that they're going to be getting across these bridges and into the defensive position, although in all fairness, over here the Flame of Arnor himself is playing as Lothlorien, so they're already in and amongst the Lindon defenders. So over here they will have a little bit more in terms of armour and overall staying power than Lindon do, though maybe Lindon make up for that in other ways. Lorenan Swordmasters are going to be pretty efficient against most of what Mordor have brought. Only really the highest tier Mordor units are going to be of concern to them. Even stuff like the Trolls and Blackguard of Barad-dûr will take a huge amount of damage at the hands of this kind of unit. Loren Axemen are also a really good unit of upper tier Elven line infantry to be using against orcs, because that extra damage that they trade in a bit of their melee defense for to wield those axes is really good against the lower end orcs, because it means they'll just be able to kill them with greater impunity and get rid of those numbers just that little bit faster without suffering too much in return for the slightly lower melee defense. Carascaladon's Guardians are in here as well. If they can get on the bridge, that's going to be a real problem. It means that Mordor are going to have to commit early their Trolls and their Blackguard of Barad-dûr just in order to try and move Lothlorien out of the way. I nearly said Arnold then, but that's the player's name. Loren Axemen, March Wands of the Wood, poison projectiles of course against factions with slightly more ropey morale, which Mordor can certainly class themselves as. That could be a real concern moving into the later stages of this fight for them. Kindred of Celeborn with their split shot projectiles as well. It's the sort of thing which you're scarcely going to miss against a force as large as this. And we've got some Woodland Protectors as well, though there is still a wing of the Lindon army over here under the command of Ingemar, which is going to be defending this side of the settlement as well. Harlingen Guard, they've got spears in melee, which in this situation isn't all that useful because it's not really going to be a battle where cavalry is going to be all that important. Certainly not for the Lindon defenders over here in the settlement anyway. More Harlingen Guard as well. We already mentioned the fact that Lindon have got the most plentiful pikes. They don't have anything on the same level individually as the Carascaladon's Guardians, but the Mithlon pikemen will still do a decent job at holding down a front line. NOLDOR Blade Masters, we mentioned them briefly as well in terms of damage dealing and getting in and amongst it. The NOLDOR Blade Masters are the most impressive of Elven units, really, unless you're talking about needing a bit of extra armour piercing. Palace Guard may have something to say about that, but the NOLDOR Blade Masters able to defeat all comers in the knockout tourney we did a few months back. Mithlon pikemen once again. The Mithlon Swordmasters, the standard heavy Elven swordsmen, similar to the Loren Swordmasters in front, only again not quite as tanky because of their lighter armour. Harlingen Guard up on the walls, and then some more Noldorin Blade Masters. And I mean, this is a lot of Noldorin Blade Masters. This is a lot of quality. I do hope that the elves haven't been given so much quality that they simply demolish the orcs. That may go some way to explaining why the battle is so short. We'll have to wait and see. Noldorin Guard are back here as well from Ingemar. This is actually his general, which is kind of interesting. Back here in the centre of the settlement. And over here on this side of things, he has got some Harlingen Guard, and he has got some other units out here as well. Mithlon pikemen, Harlingen Guard, Mithlon Swordmasters. Got some Mithlon Marines as well. Something which we haven't seen as much so far is Lindon's affinity for javelins. Will be useful if they can bottle up Mordor on those bridges for sure. That extra bit of damage going to be useful, and a couple more units of Mithlon pikemen. Out here in the open field we have the Dwarves of Khazad-Dum, interestingly enough. So I believe that's why it's marked out as Ost-in-Athil, because of course there is the story of Khazad-Dum and Ost-in-Athil, and the dwarves and elves actually helping one another, or at least making the effort to, back during the time when Ost-in-Athil was actually destroyed. Hammers of Gundabad, locked morale, huge amount of armour piercing. Armour piercing of course is going to be useful against Mordor, because what defensive capabilities they do have, very much their armour is a big part of that. We've got some 2nd Legion Axe Guard with the armour upgrade. They may not be locked morale, but with the armour upgrade they're still a very, very solid unit of Axemen, which tends to be a bit of a problem with heavy Axemen. They do tend to fall away a bit more quickly, but Dwarves have got the staying power. Plenty of sentries of Khazad-Dum. This is going to take away the effectiveness of the armour piercing that the Morannon halberds tend to bring. And then of course there's the armour piercing that the 1st Legion pikes bring. In my opinion, well, I keep saying this, and it often comes off, I think, as me sort of damning the Carascaladon's Guardians, but I do prefer the armour piercing on the 1st Legion pikes, purely because it makes the pikes so much more deadly when it comes to dealing that damage. More sentries, some 3rd Legion infantry just in behind, with some 4th Legion shield guard as well, so the line infantry and line spears, I suppose. And then there's also Mithril Guard, there's Legion Bodyguard, there's Guards of Khazad-Dum. This is an incredibly scary Khazad-Dum force. Warriors of Khazad-Dum, long range from the Orc Hunters. We've got the Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, Iron Watch. This is pretty much what you would bring if you had a ludicrous amount of money as Khazad-Dum. This is the sort of thing which, honestly speaking, the defenders should have if it was a 5v3, let alone a 4v4. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is more for the spectacle than anything else, but I'm already starting to get a bit of a feeling why with this battle may be a little bit on the short side. The rest of the Flame of Arnold, I mean, it is a 4v3 in all fairness, so they do have that working against them. It's a smaller reinforcing army over here from Lothlorien, with some of their forces already in the settlement. Watchers of the Goldenwood and Riders of the Goldenwood offering those Silverthorn arrows on foot and on horseback. so a bit of extra speed to help them cover the ground a bit more quickly. Lorenan Spears, Lorenan Swordmasters, Lorenan Archers and Warriors, so all of the heavy units. Heavy Spears, Swordsmen, the armour piercing of the Lorenan Warriors, and then more ranged power from the Lorenan Archers. More Woodland Protectors for some extra Javelins. Lorenan Spears, or Lorenan Warriors over here also. And once again, we have yet more of the Swordmasters back here. So this is a lot of quality. It is a 4v3, but this is one of the rare situations where even with an army deficiency, I worry a little bit for Mordor, because getting bottled up on those bridges and having to deal with all this quality could end up being very, very painful. But we'll see. I mean, if they can swamp over the defenders quickly in the settlement, which, based on the amount of frames there is entirely possible, we may very well see Mordor win, and I'll eat my words at that point. But whenever I see this density of really high-end units, I don't know. We'll see. The defensive positions are somewhat favourable, but enough talk. I think we shall get this battle underway pretty quickly, because it is a fast battle, so I'm sure that there will be half speed as well, because I'm fairly certain this is going to be a very chaotic affair. So without further ado, let's begin. So I do believe that what we will be seeing here is a relatively violent fight centred around the bridges. Now, at the very least, Lothlorien over here do have that cavalry, which means they can reinforce their elven brethren in the settlement itself fairly quickly. But yeah, I mean, the only thing that may turn this fight around a little bit is the fact that the Mordor orcs could smash through the relatively lightweight elven defences pretty quickly, or they'll get caught on the bridge and get shot to pieces, and their manpower will desert them pretty quickly. I think that's going to be the only two ways in which a fight with this many players, with this many units on display, and that is also this short, is going to go. So it's going to be a fairly domineering victory, I think, for one side or the other, but it's at least going to be interesting to see how that plays out here. A cunning move to only make the bridges the only way to get across. I feel as though there was maybe the intention to have river crossings as well, based upon how things are set up over here. This has the look of a map that maybe is still a work in progress almost. Also utilising some more of these elven architecture assets that were made for the update to the Grey Havens, which happened way back when. We will of course be making fairly liberal use, I think, of the half-speed feature on this battle, and indeed I think we will be doing that right from the off here with arrow fire coming in. Lindon, not the best angle for them to be shooting across, honestly. Actually, we'll give it a little bit more time first and foremost, but I mean, morale on infantry, those shields will be coming into play. The trolls are going to be very key, actually, I think, in this battle, because if the orcs were able to be held at arm's length indefinitely by these elven pikes, it would be fairly difficult for them. But with the trolls, with that mass that they have, we do worry a little bit for Lindon. Lindon are fantastic as long as the battle goes in exactly the way they want it to. Otherwise, their weaknesses can be laid bare fairly quickly. Meanwhile, over here, already the trolls, Sauron's will already shaken up. They do, of course, have the advantage over on this side of having some Lothlorien defenders to give them a hand right from the off, which is going to be very, very helpful. Riders of the Golden Wood coming in here as well. I feel as though half speed is also going to be useful for the frame rate here, because this is going to be already, you can see it juddering a little bit under the weight of all of those orcs pushing through very, very quickly. Riders of the Golden Wood going to be shooting in here as well. Silverthorn arrows will, of course, at least blunt some of the momentum, although I feel as though this is such a significant amount of orcs that are passing across this bridge that even Silverthorn arrows in the numbers that we are almost certain to see them in are not going to be the answer. The Olag High pulling a little bit further ahead of the rest of the Orcish horde, and that is going to allow the Noldorin Blade Masters to come in and maybe deal the killing blow to all of these trolls who are already bloodied from the missiles that have come their way. Javelins are also making their presence felt. The reinforcements over on this side, though, are going to be less substantial. All of these Elven units that are moving forward are of good quality. Heavier Lothlorien units indeed, but with half of their army already over here, while they will initially have more strength to hold these front lines, they can't rely on as significant a defensive relief force to come forward as over here. Sanket's Khazad-Dum army is terrifying, and if the attackers are to have success in this battle, I feel as though they are going to need to batter their way through this side of the Lindon defence as quickly as they are able to. Some arrows falling down from on high. Once again, the Olag High moving in. Completely understandable. One of the better tools that Mordor will have to try and deal with the banks of Mithlon pikemen that Ingamar has set up. Javelins being utilised as a supporting tool. But you can see over here that it is a highly limited force. So as soon as that very large blob of orcs does make its way to the front line, I do worry for them slightly. We'll see how that goes and develops. More and more orcs funneling their way forwards here. Javelins. We did see Karen Amroth Rangers, but they were part of the defence relief force that's going to be coming in later on. So body-piercing projectiles, at least, are not the sort of thing which they're going to have to deal with overwhelming amounts of. Just one unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrion over here. This is also the sort of battle where over on the other side we could very well see the Iron Watch of Miramir be a really, really strong option. Of course, there is that time limit to consider, but really I would say that even without the set time limit, the attackers, they can only really approach this battle in this manner by being extremely aggressive like this, because if they can make real progress through the initial defensive lines before the relief force arrives, I feel as though they could fairly easily, well, they could go on to win this with the numbers that they have, swamping over the defence. If they don't, by the time the relief force arrives and they're caught basically on the bridge, it's a nightmare scenario considering Medieval 2's mechanics. But we shall see. Some Mithlon pikemen pushing in once again. A lot of shaken units, but that is a result of these March Wardens of the Wood. Those poison projectiles, this is the sort of thing which could be truly devastating as well. It's a fairly even fight, however, in melee terms. It says victory seems certain for the Elves, but you can see that they are getting forced backwards. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr trying to push their way through as well. And there's no danger of reinforcements not being close enough by to make this work for the attackers if they're willing to push forward other units as well as the Blackguard, purely because they have to behave in this manner. However, with all of the infantry units already pushing across the bridges quickly, it does leave the Orc Archers vulnerable to charges from the Riders of the Golden Wood. If they've used up all their ammunition already, it's a good sign for the defenders. The Orc Archers, of course, are so vulnerable to this sort of thing as well that even Horse Archers are going to be able to do an awful lot of damage very, very quickly. Temple Executioners, the last unit that are funneling their way forward. I mean, it's still a lot of Orcs in that column there. And I don't know mass-wise whether the defenders are going to have what it takes to stop them even over here where they've got a little bit more to play with. Over here I would definitely be worried about them, with the Blackguard of Barad-dûr forcing their way through the lightweight Lindon defenders. Are Khazad-Dum going to make it in time? They're still a fair ways off. I don't think they are going to make it in time for the Orcs to get across here. Still the Archers doing their thing. I think there's no rams, but I think that this is going to be one of those situations where the gatehouse is actually just, it's technically open for all intents and purposes, even though we can't see it open. Perhaps another one of those examples of this being a little bit more of a work in progress kind of map than anything else. Yeah, the Blackguard always going to be difficult for Lindon to deal with. The extra support from Lothlorien over on the other side proving itself to be very, very useful indeed. As over here, Lindon's weaknesses once again laid bare. Arrows still ballooning themselves into the Orcish force. Tip of the spear though, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Olag High in and amongst it as well. Playing it very much as you would need to in this situation as the Orcs. And if they can get into a position where they can technically act as the defenders against Khazad-Dum, things may very well work out in their favour. But even over here you can see that the Blackguard of Barad-dûr have done their work, although they're significantly weaker for it over here and they may end up routing. There's a few units funneling their way through as well, Orc Maulers, but they're routing. Unsurprisingly, one of the more fragile Orc units not able to maintain their mental discipline. The Elves have also arrived more quickly than the Khazad-Dum Dwarves, so things over on this side, I think, for the defenders are progressing better. So maybe it's not as cut and dry as I was initially thinking. Still very much up in the air as to who is actually going to go on to be successful in this battle. Still the poison arrows ballooning overhead. Another important tool is, of course, the standard Lindon archers, similar colour schemes, but standard Lindon archers don't have those poison projectiles, so they can't rely on the extra damage. And also, interesting choice to have the Wardens of Lothlorien over on this side. There were deployment zones, so they could have put the Wardens on the other side to blunt the attack over there a little bit more so, but they've decided to put them over here, maybe putting more emphasis on this defence, Lindon, more of a sacrificial air to things over on the other side of the battlefield. As once again, more of those Orc Maulers starting to rout. The Halberds just about holding on, but with their formation compromised like this and Noldor and Blade Masters around, I can't imagine that's going to last too much longer. As much as Mordor are managing to sustain their assault over here, I can't imagine it's going to end too well for them. Especially now you see over on this side the Riders of the Golden Wood, Woodman Protectors and the other heavy Lothlorien units now crossing the same bridge that Mordor were using to try and penetrate the heart of EREGION. Temple Execution is effectively acting as the rear guard. They are using the Minas Morgul Chosen as a mass pushing unit. It can be done. It's not their singular focus like the Blackguard of Barad-dûrs, but heavy spears like this can still be used in this manner, and they're having some success doing it. I mean, with the reinforcements already arriving and with many of their units struggling, I think Mordor's best bet is really to just do as much damage to the defending forces over on this side of the river as they possibly can, because for the attackers it is over here where they are going to be at their most dangerous. With the settlement now basically completely open to attack, there's only a few Mithlond pikemen still fighting on over here, and with the horde of orcs being what they are, I can't imagine that their morale is going to hold together for too much longer. And we can see over here, Sons of the Fallen now, Orc Archers still over on this side of the river. I think they would be best placed just trying to shoot into the dwarves and just distract them that little bit longer. Any amount of time that can be bought for Mordor to set themselves up on that side of the river to get ready for Khazad-Dum is going to be appreciated, but perhaps the dwarves' slightly slower nature also proving to be a bit of a problem over here. I mean, there is actually still more Lindon than I was expecting. Mithlond Swordmasters doing their best. If it were if all things were even, the Mithlond Swordmasters would be fantastic against Morannon class units from Mordor. But all things are most assuredly not even over here. And this is always how Mordor were going to have to approach this battle. Through sheer brute strength and numbers. It's something that the Orcs definitely have in their locker, and they have managed to deploy it here. Yeah, you can go straight into the settlement. So we may actually see the interior of the settlement used more in this battle than I was initially expecting. It was always going to be a tricky kind of... I say that, it was actually very straightforward for both sides in terms of what they had to do. It's just how they execute on them. Split shot projectiles from the Kindred of Celeborn now also being utilised when you can scarcely miss. The Orcs have managed to carve out a decent chunk of territory for themselves over here. I would say the attackers on this side have probably done better than the defenders on the other side, so maybe that does bode well for Mordor, but I still feel as though the level of quality that Khazad-Dum are bringing to the table, as soon as they do start getting into that Mordor army that has had some success, I would worry for them, and ultimately Mordor are going to be defeated over here. It's just a case of how many elves they can take with them. And with the Wardens of Lothlorien getting a little bit further back, there's one surviving troll from that initial attack of the trolls on the front line, trying to do his thing. Some Silverthorn arrows trying to finish him off. Just trying to disrupt the Rangers. So I have to say, I think Mordor on both sides of the field have actually done all that they could in terms of focus. They've been aggressive, they've tried to focus down elements of the defending army that are most dangerous, and it was always going to come down to whether or not they could efficiently deal with the initial defenders before the reinforcements arrived. And I don't know, I think Mordor are doing decently against the Lindon forces that were over here. There's not too much of Lothlorien left. Further over here, Harland and Guard, a few Noldor and Blade Masters still live. Evenly matched fighting. I mean, to be fair, Mordor were getting dumpstered in melee earlier on, so their numbers have allowed them to come back into things a little bit more. What have we over here? We've got some routing Harland and Guard. The column of orcs marches on. But so too do the dwarves, and they are now making their way across the river, and actually Ankle's managing to save that one unit of orc archers, so more resources to use within the settlement. Sadly, even if the defenders are to be successful here, they are going to need to clean up their own settlement. Interestingly enough, there are actually going to be some Lindon elves marching with the dwarves in order to try and effectively recapture the settlement at this point. These Mithlon swordmasters have not been finished off. They've managed to survive, and actually some Mithlon pikemen as well, so it goes to show what Mordor's true aim was. As the crow flies, the direct approach. Route 1. And now can they set up and defend? Because Mordor, I mean, if they do get into a defensive position, well, the defending forces that were left from Lindon, and then the reinforcements from Khazad-Dum and Lothlorien will have to try and dislodge them from the interior of the settlement. I really do think the level of quality is going to be too much for Mordor, regardless of what they do, but we'll see. Minas Morgul's chosen. Still in decent numbers and getting closer now towards the Warns of Lothlorien. That one troll interrupted them for a little while, but they are capable of looking after themselves in melee. When it's just one injured troll, fairly easily taken down. Scattering themselves out a little bit, those March Wardens are going to fall by the wayside against the Mordor infantry. Backlines are completely exposed now. Kindred of Celeborn not able to continue their assault. They're going to have to get into melee, but they still should be just fine, even against one of the better Mordor infantry units like Uruk Captains. Further back over here, Mordor's still on the march. NOLDOR guard trying to get themselves into place as well. That is the general unit, so putting himself in harm's way, but going to consolidate with some of Flame of Arnor's Lothlorien troops that are still fighting for the bridge over here. Cairn Amroth Rangers and more archers as well. As I've mentioned several times, that is the calibre of unit that Mordor, regardless of how well they do initially, are going to have to find the strength to deal with later on. Cavalry still moving in, although with the battle this chaotic and with anti-cavalry units like the Minas Morgul's chosen still roaming around, I don't know if the Riders of the Golden Wood are going to particularly enjoy being in this fight over here. And we can actually see, I believe, yes indeed, they're going to march straight through the settlement and try to outright win over here. So for Khazad-Dum, this fight has really been just a chase so far. All of these Mordor orcs are going to arrive to the other side, which maybe is the way to go. Try and separate the high quality armies they're having to deal with so far, and they're always going to be able to be one step ahead of Khazad-Dum. There is still the question of eventually they're going to have to turn around, and even if they're completely victorious on the other side of the settlement, they're still going to have to find the strength to deal with that high quality Dwarven army, whether Mordor have enough left. But I do like this actually. It was a kind of an awkward setup for Mordor to have to deal with, but I actually feel as though the attacks have done reasonably well at that so far. But the quality of the defenders that they still have is a problem, and there's still, of course, the small matter of maybe one of the victory conditions was the general for Lindon here in the NOLDOR Guard unit has to survive, because they're very eager to get him out of harm's way and not use this unit of NOLDOR Guard, which a unit of that high quality, exactly the sort of thing which would be very good at dealing with stuff like Minas Morgul Chosen. There's still those NOLDOR Blade Masters in and amongst here. They're taking a few losses, but you have to say not a huge amount. Only a few of them are bloodied up as well. One of the very best damage-dealing infantry units the game has to offer, though, so that's not perhaps that surprising. Some more battered and bruised trolls. Warns of Lothlorien moving forwards. We're going to be seeing this side of the battlefield become the epicenter for the conflict now for all of the armies. Temple Execution is still alive. A lot of Mordor's units have had to take some level of damage just to get to the point they're at now. Moranarn Swordmasters still giving it their all on the front line. And they will be very good against most of these Moranarn infantry units, but again, all of these reinforcements now arriving. managed to essentially turn the tables. Mordor are now caught between two effectively attacking forces from the Elder races. Trolls going after the Kindred. Once again, the Kindred trying to get into a position where they can utilise their missiles, but not able to yet. In fact, the Trolls, well, point blank, you can see that at least 2 of them died there as a result of that damage that was just done. Doing their thing as well. There's a lot of Minas Morgul chosen in Sauron's will, which do represent the upper crust of Mordor's standard units in both a defensive and offensive capacity, so you can see that pretty much all of the rank and file from Mordor over here have been defeated, either through being killed outright or their slightly lower morale scores proving to be too much to overcome. Interesting that the Trolls are choosing here to get into the conflict. I don't think the Noldoran Blade Masters nor the Sword Masters from Lothlorien are the sort of thing that they would want to be fighting, given their already heavily wounded state, but I guess I'm wrong. Kindred of Celeborn getting some point-blank shots before they inevitably get engaged in melee, but they should be fine. Haldir is here, and he may end up getting skewered by one of the Orc spears, but we shall see. A little bit further back, Orc archers on their way forwards. Still Khazad-Dum on the way forward. It is weird to think that Khazad-Dum, we're most of the way through the battle at this point, and Khazad-Dum still haven't actually done anything because the Orcs have been just too far away from them. Is there a case for saying Mordor should have set up on that island over there? I would say probably not. I think Mordor are actually doing the right things. If they do bank up, then there's still stuff like the Rangers from the Elves, and especially the Iron Watch. If the Orcs were to try and consolidate around a defensive position, the Iron Watch would absolutely demolish them. And also, in a choke point fight, even if they were on the attack, with no real projectiles to help them anymore, Mordor, they would slowly be ground down by the quality, and that's the kind of battle that Khazad-Dum in particular would love. So I actually think trying to maintain aggression and momentum to the best extent that they can here is probably the best idea for the Orcish players, as they continue to try and, at the very least, kill off most of the Elven contingent. Units going flying as a result of the Black Guard of Barad-dûr pushing forwards. Noldoran Guard now in behind all of these elves. Carin Amroth Rangers still with ammunition. A lot of the basic Lorien archers still as well. Those March ones actually were saved in the end. There may only be 38 of them remaining, but the poison projectiles will still be inflicting their morale debuff on these Mordor forces as they move. And if they truly are going after that general, and that is a victory condition, maybe that is Mordor's best chance as they continue to hunt him down. And that would be most unfortunate for the defenders, I suppose, given that, you know, it would also be taking full advantage of the fact that Khazad-Dum are simply too slow to keep up. I don't believe that was something that was given to me in the description for this battle replay, but maybe it was. I mean, it was a little while ago that this one was sent to me. I don't know, but maybe it is possible. They've still got Watchers of the Golden Wood over there, and ultimately if they don't have a force that can overwhelm a unit of Watchers of the Golden Wood and Noldoran Guard, it's less likely that they're going to be able to kill off Círdan. Although I guess it would be someone else, given that this is EREGION. Orc was on the way forward, trying to go after those Kindred of Celeborn, struggling here. The full extent of the numbers that smashed through that original Lindon defence now making themselves known. What's going on here? Around on halberds. Some sort of routing unit as well. Yeah, Black Guard of Barad-dûr. I was wondering if they'd left one unit behind to try and stall the dwarves' progress, which, even if it were Orc archers, considering the tactics that they are now having to work to, Mordor, maybe it wouldn't be the worst idea. Javelins. Doing a decent amount of damage there. Maybe it is possible. As I said, I do think Mordor have been... It's been a I mentioned that it was an awkward setup for Mordor to have to try and deal with, but their single-mindedness has actually helped them in this battle so far, I think. And it's kind of a unique situation for a battle as well. So another custom scenario well worth showing in spite of its significantly shorter nature. It's also very rare that you see a battle this violent. I mean, it is a short battle and there are a lot of players on display, and it is a siege battle. All of these things usually add up to being some of the longer battles that the channel posts, but yeah, on this occasion, not so. All these Morannon infantry still pushing forward, trying to keep a tight formation, keep pushing forwards. The cavalry now getting in the way as well, and I mean, if that is the conditions that have been set out, this is exactly the sort of thing they need to be doing now, the defenders, just trying to make life awkward for Mordor until the dwarves can arrive, and then you would imagine that Mordor's army would start to fall apart fairly quickly. There's also the small matter of those Silverthorn arrows and the ranger fire ripping through. So this is going to cost Mordor pretty much the entirety of their chance at winning this battle in a more conventional fashion, although I think that ship sailed a long time ago. There's still a lot of Mordor orcs still pushing forwards as well, trying to deal with what remains of Lothlorien here on the flanks. More javelins still throwing in. He seems certain for those Kindred of Celeborn being overwhelmed, as the Wardens of Alos Tyrion are. So the defenders have had a lot of orcs to deal with, and ultimately it does look as though they're going to be overwhelmed here. More worryingly for them, they're being overwhelmed while the centre of the bridge is still largely clear, so they can keep pushing forwards. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, they're trying to get the Noldorin Guard out of there, but I don't think it really matters. I mean, unless the dwarves can arrive a little bit more quickly. Cairn Amroth Rangers now being pressed into melee service. This one unit of Blackguard of Barad-dûr has been at the heart of Mordor's efforts to win the battle via that victory condition. Pushing through the initial defence over on the other side of the river, pushing through the defenders on this side of the bridge, and now also trying to do the same to the Elven archers that still stand in their way, though, as is always the case, these Great Shield units only have a certain amount of life in them. And while they're doing very well, with Watchers of the Golden Wood arriving as I thought they might, I think this may be end of the line for them. Mordor should still have the numbers to continue mass pushing anyway, but Mordor's still marching on. I mean, we're almost to the halfway point of the time limit, though we also know that the battle is most assuredly not going to last that long anyway. And the dwarves still, they're only marching. They are not, they will not be rushed, which I find somewhat strange considering the fact that Mordor are now completely clearing house. Maybe there's a chance as well that Mordor could outright win this. I mean, with the elves now basically at death's door, Mordor could turn around and surround the dwarves as they come forwards. All throughout this battle I was prepared to say I like the way the attackers have been approaching this battle, but ultimately it just wasn't to be. But maybe it is to be. Maybe they can do the business. They continue to push through, taking an awful lot of damage at the hands of those Watchers though. And the Noldorin Guard do turn themselves around, maybe going to try and get involved in melee, the risk to be taken, but maybe they're seeing at this point it's fruitless to continue in the manner that they have been so far. It's a lot of orcs though. The general's almost certain to perish. With that, the Blackguard have managed to push their way through. Not many of them have done so, but another hurdle overcome. If one of them can get a lucky swipe at the bearded elf. He's just going to bypass them completely. Sinking into the ground a little bit there. Terrain glitching. Love to see it. Still a lot of orcs. Still the frame rate struggling a little bit, even at 1 speed now. Sons of the Fallen making their way forwards. Temple Guard now able to utilise their bows for the first time in this battle. Of course, they've been used as part of this single-minded Mordor push. But now they can turn around and start using their armour-piercing arrows on a good target as well, the dwarves. Armour-piercing. Almost a necessity to beat them, really. Sons of the Fallen. So Mithlon pikemen still among their number, so those few elves that survived that initial Mordor push will be marching alongside Mordor. And even with all the quality, even with the funneling into individual places, it does go to show that if you're not prepared to deal with an aggressive push like that, it can be the end of you. And I think fair enough. I mean, the battle was very clearly set up so that Mordor, if they didn't do something like this, would just be battered by rangers. The reinforcements would arrive quickly. But they were fast, they were decisive, and it's given them every chance of going on to win this now. The Noldorin Guard fighting. Where is the general? He is... he's right here at the back. There's actually a Mordor general as well. The Nazgul. Well, this could be interesting. I don't know what on earth he's doing. He's shaken. Maybe he's wondering if he should actually be in melee against Nazgul. Interesting that the Nazgul is one of the ones that has made it through. One of the Black Riders. Oof, look at this. That frame rate though. Medieval 2 doesn't like it. And this is the problem with very aggressive battles like this. It reminds me of the scenarios way back when that Horton used to create, where it was commonplace for a very, very large fight that would munch through your frames to be the order of the day. Very reminiscent of that sort of thing. The dwarves now moving forwards. I mean, this is going to be the moment where the battle is decided. I don't know. I mean, if Mordor were completely surrounded on both sides, it would be more of a tricky thing. But with only 2 Elven units on the other side, they could continue to push forwards. But again, this Dwarven quality. I think it rather comes down to whether or not the death of that general means the battle is lost for the defenders. I don't remember that being a condition that was laid out, but based on the fact that they've really been trying to safeguard this unit of Noldorin Guard, maybe it is the case. The elves really just clinging to life at this point against the horde of orcs that still exists. Bridge fighting. Bridges mechanically in Medieval 2 are not these. I mean, to be fair, bridges are actually fine when they're the only method of getting across a river. When there's like land crossings, that's when the pathfinding can be a little bit more awkward. But, I mean, we're getting to the point now where surely, I mean, they're not going to be able to kill off the entirety of the Mordor army. There's no way that Khazad-Dum's entire army is going to fall either. So I feel as though we already kind of know how this battle is going to end, surely. And it's probably going to end with the death of the Lindon general as the orcs swamp over him. Maybe it was specified in the Discord DM and I just cannot recall. If so, though, I think it's a well executed victory for Mordor. And it's a unique setup for a battle in the first place. So it's nice to see. Ooh, Nazgul slicing away. Not many of the elves left. Khazad-Dum are on the way. Finally, Sanket getting to utilise some of his extremely high quality in the kind of environment as well on a bridge where this Khazad-Dum force would be exceptional, but it's going to be too late. There goes the Elven general, trampled underfoot by the orcs. And the worst thing now is these orcs can actually escape into the hills. They have blasted through the other side, gone right through the settlement, probably damaging things along the way, killing off all the elves, and now they can go off into the distance and hide in the hills. And I think that's a deserved victory from Mordor based on the victory conditions that were set out, and it's a situation where you can see just based on the fact that Khazad-Dum only 169 kills, they never got into the battle because they were never allowed to get into the battle. They were simply chasing Mordor all the time. The slower nature of the dwarves meant they just weren't able to get into position quickly enough. And yeah, I mean, it was what it was. I think, is there anything else the defenders could have done based on the rules as they were? Not really. I think it could very easily have gone the other way. If Mordor weren't willing to be as front foot and as aggressive as they were, using their mass to their fullest advantage, then it would have gone the other way, because they simply wouldn't have made enough progress through the settlement. They would have then had to deal with the extremely high quality Khazad-Dum infantry in this kind of battle, like I said, on those bridges as well, in a more confined area. Stuff like the Iron Watch and all of those Dwarven infantry units would have made Mordor's job, I think, fairly impossible. So this really was the only way in which Mordor were ever likely to win the battle. And there we go. So the Elven general does fall, and EREGION is defiled, though not lost, but maybe this is how it was turned to ruin. And yeah, interesting, very interesting. I think you saw Lindon's weakness to a certain extent, although I don't think many other factions would have been that good over on the other side either, but just a few units of pikes, a couple of units of archers. It was like a red rag to a bull, really. I think it was always likely that when Mordor saw how little was on that side from Ingomar, it was always likely that, right, we're just going to push through and try to beeline it for the general, and that's it, basically. We have one objective and we're going straight for it, and that's exactly what Ankles and the Warlord did. And Mordor, even on this side, were trying their best, and they actually did make some progress, although if it weren't for the reinforcements from Mordor arriving through the settlement from the other side, they would have ultimately lost on this side. And I think that comes down to a couple of things. One, Lindon actually made more of their resources available over here, stuff like the Wardens of Lothlorien, which maybe would have been a bit more useful on the other side, just to inflict a bit more damage and slow the Mordor momentum a little bit more so. But also the fact that some of the Lothlorien units were already in the settlements over here, so they had, again, a little bit of extra to help support the initial Lindon defence. And also Lothlorien were able to get their reinforcements in more quickly than Khazad-Dum were, not only because they're mounted units, but the elves were quicker across the ground. And I don't know whether... One thing that is worth bearing in mind is because the battle was taking place elsewhere and there's not really a great deal of point in watching Khazad-Dum move, if Khazad-Dum were only marching rather than running the whole time, that is basically the reason why the attackers won. Because if Khazad-Dum were not running, then you have to expect the fact that if they were, then they would have made it more quickly. Even though the dwarves are slow, that would have been enough to give them the edge they need, I think. But we won't know now. It's the sort of thing which you'd have to ask the Dwarven player himself. But that could end up being the most significant mistake in the battle. But I have no... I could go back and have a look, I suppose. But perhaps it's best that we simply leave as is. And yeah, I think a good victory, though, for Mordor. I think that when you have those victory conditions set out for you, and you see a way in which you can accomplish them without having to win the battle in a more conventional manner. The vast majority of the battles we see, after all, are just overall victory. But with this, different objectives, Mordor played to the objective, and ultimately they ended up getting a deserved victory, I think, even with the quality that the defenders had. But yeah, a unique battle, so big thank you to the Flame of Arnor for making this one, and the map as well. I do feel as though if this battle were to be used as a standard siege map battle, I feel as though having a couple of river crossings as well as the bridges would probably be fairly necessary to make this one work, if only because if it is a standard siege battle and the objectives are not set out as such, the bridges, one bridge on either side would make this battle, it would be the best way to play the battle would be to only hold the bridge, and that would make it for a very one-dimensional map. So that would be my advice to Flame of Arnor, maybe make a few more pathways to the central island, and that would make the battle in more of a traditional way anyway, a little bit more of a well-rounded map. But for this scenario, actually, the fact that there were only those two bridges and it allowed Mordor to play the way they did, actually I think made it a more interesting one. But for the most part, I would say that more ways across maybe necessary. Maybe something on the front as well, just to add to that. But yeah, big thanks to Flame of Arnor, another good scenario, and we've been getting quite a few here so far throughout the early stages of 2023, which is a good thing. With the work on the new patch now continuing apace, we should be seeing that at some point later on in the year as well, which means that hopefully these new scenarios and such will keep us going until then, and I will of course be dripping in a few battles from the test build of the new patch as well, as and where I can, just to show people some of the new stuff and keep people appraised of its progress. But yeah, As for what's coming up next, I will be making the final visit to the old version of Moria, a battle that was given to me by 2 times towards the tail end of 2022. So we'll be doing that one in the very next battle. Following that, there will be another Siege free-for-all map, which again the Womb Raider sent to me even longer ago. I think it was like September of last year. But like I said, in the last one of those that we saw, I want to spread those out a little bit because they do tend to be a little bit less popular in terms of people that view them. That one's going to be on the Ardenheim Outpost. So those will be the 2 battles coming up after this one. Following that, I may very well be doing the knockout tourney of Sword Cavalry to round off that series before the next patch comes out. But other than that, haven't really planned too much further in advance. There may be a few test builds, things that I can look at, or between then and now, of course, more scenarios could have cropped up, and I will once again have to rearrange the schedule. But enough of my waffling. There may actually be the need for another channel update at some point, but I won't go on and on about that. Like if you see that pop up, I'll be a little bit more spontaneous about it this time than I was about it throughout the entirety of last year. But yes, enough of my rambling, I think. Big thanks to the Flame of Arnor, big thanks to all the players for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.